my second baby was born in 1943, and in 1944, when she was almost 12 months old, and my neighbour's daughter, of course, was 12 months old. Now, what we used to do was bath the children in the morning, get them into the prams, and I would wheel my pram up to the hedge. It was a very low hedge, and stand the pram there, and my neighbour would bring her pram and put it the other side the hedge, so that when the children awoke, they would sort of sit up and wave to one another and do baby talk and all kinds of things and wave their arms, and it was really good company for one another. Now, my neighbour and I would stand there by the hedge, and she'd tell me she may have had a letter from her husband who was away at the war, and she'd tell me what he'd said and what she was worried about. She'd put some children's clothes in the oven and they'd burnt, and she'd been in a terrible state over that, and she wondered if she could get insurance money and all those kind of things. We talked about all kinds of things. But while we were standing this one particular morning, it was early into September, I know, we suddenly heard a humming noise. And she said, "Oh, wasps, wasps." And I said, "No, it doesn't sound like wasps, does it?" And we listened, and it still went on. And she said, "Seems almost like blue bottles." And we were sort of looking towards the prams to see that there were no flies or anything round there. And she said, "Well, I don't know what it is. I can't think what it can possibly be." And I said, "Well, perhaps they're doing something down at the works." See, we were only about a mile from the Cadbury Works, and I said, "Perhaps they're doing something down there. Perhaps it's coming from there." You could hear things if things were happening down at the works. And we stood there for a bit longer. And then my friend said, "You know, it's like a roar." She said, "If there was any planes up there, you'd almost think it was planes, wouldn't you?" And I said, "Yes, it's just a continual roar, isn't it?" And we began looking up into the sky, and suddenly we saw them, and thousands of planes were up there, and of course they'd been going over some time by the time we saw them, but they were so small, they were so high in the sky, they were just like little teeny ants. And as we watched them, you could detect the great big transport planes and all the bundles of material swaying on the back, and plane after plane after plane. And as we watched, I said, "Oh, there must be something big afoot." And she said, "Yes, there must be, must there?" She said, "Oh, there's hundreds of planes up there, isn't there? Hundreds of them." "Oh, dear," she said, "look at those big transport planes." And I said, "Yes, how many men would there be in each one of those?" I said, 100, 200. I said, "Oh, just think of them all sitting there holding the cord ready to pull it," I said, "for the parachute." I said, "Not knowing where they're going and what's coming." I said, "Oh, I wonder how many of them are going to their deaths. Do you think they are?" She said, "Well," she said, "there must be something very big on for to be so many planes as this going over." She said, "Just think all the fathers in there." And I said, "Yes, and all the sons, the sweethearts." Oh, and we were so, and at last I just couldn't see the planes any more because my eyes had sort of glazed over with the tears that were there. And I sort of pulled my eye down and I looked at her, and Nellie had got a tear running down her cheek. She said, "Oh, isn't it sad?" I said, "Oh, this terrible war, where are they going? What are they going to do with all these men?" And we were really very upset about it. And at last we went into the house, and every day after that I'd say to her, "Have you heard anything?" No, we've no idea where those planes were going. We'd watched them until they'd gone out of sight. But it had taken ages for them to pass over us. And she said, "No, I haven't heard anything at all," she said. "Oh dear, I wish we knew what had happened to them all." Well, then the news broke.
About 2 hours ago, Supreme Headquarters gave the news of our airborne landing in Holland in this brief announcement. Strong forces of the 1st Allied Airborne Army were landed in Holland this afternoon.
In just about 30 seconds now, our ship will drop, and these 19 men will walk out onto Dutch soil. There goes, do you hear them shout? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. There they go. Every man out. I can see their chutes going down now. Every man clear. They're dropping just beside a little windmill near a church.
I think it was a Sunday morning the news broke. And it was Arnhem. And it had been a disaster. And I remember going out with the baby, and she brought her baby out. And she looked at me, and I looked at her. And she nodded her head and shook it, as much as to say, "Oh, it's terrible, it's terrible."
Just a few minutes ago, the fighter cover showed up, and right behind them came those lovely supply planes that you can hear up above us now. Yesterday and this morning, our supplies came, and they were dropped in the wrong place. The enemy got them. But now these planes have come over, and they've dropped them right dead over us. All these bundles and parachuted packages and ammunition are coming down here all around us, through the trees, bouncing on the ground. The men are running out to get them, and you have no idea what this means to us to see this ammunition and this food coming down here where the men can get it. They're such fighters that if they can only get the stuff to fight with, it's a wonderful thing. It's a shame. It's a shame when they can't get the stuff to fight with. But the bundles are coming down. The parachutes are coming down. That's all that these men ask.
And I said, "All those lives," I said. And when we were watching them up here, they were alive. Now they're all dead. Terrible to think of. It was one of my worst moments of the war, I think, that morning, when I realised that all those planes that I'd seen going over had met with disaster. One Armistice Remembrance Day, I can remember watching the television, and it was the British Legion that were doing the television broadcast, and they showed us a picture of the Arnhem cemetery with all the gravestones. And I remember I stared at it and I wept, and it brought back that day when I'd seen all the planes going over, and now here was the graves of all those men. It was so sad. Impossible really to imagine that awful things like that could happen.